is it, can that be wrong for someone to want to do that, or?
But if it could be a bad thing, if they wanna do it to, achieve power.
Yeah, I had written down here, it's good if it's done for the right reasons. Can somebody read James 3, 1?
My brethren, let not many of you become teachers, knowing that you shall receive a greater.
Okay, so James there is giving a, kind of a warning that those who teach will have a stricter judgment because you have more responsibility. And that's something that, you shouldn't take lightly if someone is particularly in the office of, a teacher or a leader in the church. It's, it's a important, an important job. Specifically somebody that's, that's what their job is to the exclusion of maybe other work or something that, is particularly it's a good thing to desire, but it's also, comes with a lot of responsibility, and James says a greater judgment in a way. Yeah.
I'm just thinking about that too, because something just popped in my mind. God says if you follow him and you obey him, he will grant you the desires of your heart. Your
Right.
heart is towards God. So to have the desire to take the office of bishop means that you're seeking after the Lord.
Right. Excuse me. Verse 2, it says, a bishop must be blameless. The version says here, above reproach. What does that mean? I was thinking specifically of blameless. Does that mean somebody's perfect? No. And I think when we look at these qualifications, we have to remember that, because you could definitely be over strict with it. If you're looking for somebody that's completely perfect, you're not going to find them. And but above, I kind of liked a little bit more. I said above reproach. Not someone that's perfect, but someone that's, I guess you could say, better than most, or that's trying, striving to follow God to be more perfect. Someone that's that lives up to a lot of these as much as they can, and is honest and admits when they don't, and seeks to do better with that. No one can truly be perfect, but that should be our goal, particularly those that lead. And this is specifically talking about leaders, but it's a goal for all Christians. We're all leaders or teachers somewhere of somebody, and so that's something we should all be wanting to do. Not everybody can be or should be the leader of a church. If everybody was the leader of a church, there wouldn't be anybody in the church, and then there wouldn't be any leaders of the church. So that doesn't work. But it is definitely something we should all be wanting to see in ourselves, more of these things that God gives us. And then I went through, it kind of gives two lists. One, it says, in the book, bishops, deacons. I don't really know what's the difference between those two, but the lists of different things, it was a little bit repeated, but I just kind of went through each one as it goes. And I just noticed that, this list will, well, I guess I should ask it, would this list disqualify some genuine Christians from church leadership? And I think the answer is yes. There's some people that, wouldn't be qualified for this. Can somebody read Ephesians 4:11 through 12?
And he himself gave some to be apostles, some prophets, some evangelists, and some pastors and teachers, for the equipping of the saints for the work of ministry, for the edifying of the body of Christ.
Thank you. So yeah, there's some people aren't qualified to be the teaching or leader of a church, but we all have a job to do, and what we need to be concerned about is that we do that. It's like, oh well, I can't do that, and I'm just going to sit and do nothing. No, we all have a job to do what we should. God's given everyone something to do, some gift that we can do, and that's what we should be worried about, and we should also want to do it as best as we can for Him. It starts out, verse 3, it says, "Now the overseer must be above reproach, the husband of one wife." Kind of what I thought there is, well, the husband of one wife, taken as he's to be a man. It is a job for a man to be the leader of the church, a pastor, and that's not a job for a woman. A woman can do lots of things in the church, but that's not one that God has given. Can somebody read 1 Timothy 2:12?
And I do not permit a woman to teach or to have authority over a man, but to be your child. For Adam,
Okay, thank you. As we know, I probably should have looked up more verses with that, but women are to teach, it says, other women, children. There's lots of jobs for them to do in the church, but it does say the deacon is to be, or the leader is to be a man. There's many places that says this, but we can definitely infer this as husband of one wife. But also the husband of one wife means several other things. Obviously, no one with two wives is to be leading the church. I think that kind of goes without saying. Especially nowadays, that doesn't seem to be as much of a problem, at least here. But at the time it was, that's how that worked. And I think you can say people, someone that's been married once, and so to speak. I was reading through this. It says several times the husband of one wife, and it was kind of curious to me. Does this require someone to be married to be the leader? And I don't know with that. I couldn't really come up with a good answer to this. This is Paul writing, but then again, Paul never really was the pastor of a church. So I didn't have a good answer to that. I don't know if anybody has anything on that, but that was kind of interesting to me. I know through history, it's kind of been taken different ways. I don't really know, but.
I don't know what the answer is, but I will say that marriage teaches you things, and it teaches you character and stuff you learn about roles more than a single man will ever get. There'll be some stuff that a single person would never be brought into. I'm not saying it says you have to be married, but being married definitely helps you in the position of authority in leading a family.
Right, and it also gives qualifications later on for the pastor or deacon's wife, which wouldn't really be applicable in a place where they're not. So yeah, that was an interesting thought to me. Something I definitely look into more. Also raised a little bit of a question as to someone that's remarried because of the death of their spouse. I don't know how it would be taken that way. I don't think due to divorce or anything, I don't think that's really permitted, but it is interesting there. Moving on, the next word we see is vigilant. I looked up what vigilant meant just in the dictionary, and it means alert, wide awake. You know, you're looking for someone that's not lazy, that does their job well, that's paying attention, that's gonna catch things that are, you know, wrong, that's gonna catch problems. And I think that's a very important thing. You know, you can have someone that's not necessarily wrong, they're not necessarily teaching falsehood, but they're just not working very hard, you know, and that can be a fine line, because obviously everybody's definition of working hard is a little bit different, but you know, you can agree you don't want something that's just lazy, that's not working at it and not paying attention. The next one we have here would be, it says sober. And I know sober is a lot of times taken to mean not drunk, basically. I don't think that's what it's talking about here, because it specifically later talks about not given to wine. So I was thinking, okay, what else can sober mean? Sober can be taken in some ways as sad. I don't think exactly it's there, but it's kind of thinking of, you know, emotionally sober, someone that's not volatile, for lack of a better word, not quick to jump to conclusions, not easily worked up, you know. Someone you can tell something to and they're not going to explode, you know, or have a problem with it, you know. It's a right, yeah, in a way that you're not getting worked up and having problems with that. Clear-minded is a very good way to put that, and just someone that can think clearly, apply God's word, even in the midst of conflict and struggles and things that would make most people kind of lose it. The next one I have is of good behavior. The other version here says respectable. I think we normally think of this in children. It ties in a little bit with sober as well, but it applies to adults. You know, someone that's just hard to put your finger on it exactly, but someone that's well behaved. You know, not rude, not, you know, just someone that you can work with. And I didn't have a whole lot there, but I think it does apply. You know, people, you understand how that works in different situations. Given to hospitality. I don't think people really, or we commonly think of this one, at least I don't, I guess, as much as a qualification for someone, or as something that a Christian should be doing. But it's not, or maybe we take it as something that's less important, but it's something that's kind of required. Can someone read Romans 12:13?
Distributing to the needs of the saints, given hospitality.
Okay. I think I should have read more around that verse, but this can look a lot different in different cultures and different places, depending on someone's ability. You can say someone's very hospitable for many different reasons. Not everyone has a house they can invite people into. That's not a requirement, but someone that's helpful. But I think it's interesting that it's given as a command, right along with a lot of other things that we would probably think is more important. You know, it's an important thing that people be, it's right along with generous, you know, willing to invite people into your home if you can, or help provide for them, or do what you can for others. And I don't think it's something you can really say, okay, you need to be doing this, you need to be inviting people into your home, because everybody can't do that. Some people really don't have the ability, but the willingness and the ability to help as much as you can and to do that, it's a requirement here. Someone needs to be able to do that. And for all of us, I think that's a good practice to want to do that if we can. Apt to teach, or able to teach, maybe here. This is more of a practical skill. I would put this as something that, someone could really meet almost all of these other ones and still just some people are not very good at teaching. Someone, it could be a physical thing. Someone could be deaf or unable to speak. And in that case, they're just not going to be able to they're not going to be able to do what I'm doing here. They're not going to be able to lead a church. And that's nothing against them. It's just they're unable. Some people are just hard to understand. I might be one of them, and mm-hmm. Yeah, that's true. And but it has to be someone that can do it, and like we read earlier, God gives different people different gifts, and some people are just a lot better at teaching than others, and it's nothing wrong with the people that aren't. It's just how people, and some people are better at, singing, or people are better at helping people with things. Some people are better at hospitality or different things, but some people are definitely gifted in teaching. And, it's very helpful when you have someone like that is teaching, because they kind of inherently do a better job, even just for practical reasons. Next one is not given to wine. I think this is fairly self-explanatory, but we still should look into it. We do know that later on in Timothy, Paul advises Timothy to take a little wine for his stomach. But I wanted to read Romans 14:21.
It is good neither to eat meat nor drink wine, nor do anything by which your brother stumbles, or is offended, or is made weak.
Okay, thank you. We know throughout the Bible, it never completely condemns drinking or using alcohol or wine for any reason. But I think we can take a pretty good principle from that verse and several others like it, of that if someone is stumbled by what you're doing, you should stop, And what I see is, if someone has, someone, it says, like Paul says to Timothy, is using a little wine for something, and someone approaches it or something, and they realize that it should be something that someone gives up with well, just like, if that's a problem, just get rid of it, stop. And I think in our culture, pretty much that's how it is. I'm not going to say across everywhere, but, I can't really think of a situation where a leader of a church could do that and not stumble someone. And they should be willing to just stop. It's not something you should see in them. And, making a brother stumble, I personally can't see any way that someone could do that and not make a brother stumble. And I think that's one way of what it's saying here. Different places can be different. And this time when Paul is teaching this, I think it was a lot different than now. And but now I don't think that's something any leader should be doing. For the most part, any Christian, there may be some sort of acceptable situation. I don't know. It's not completely forbidden in the Bible, but it doesn't seem like a wise thing to do. Verse 3 still. This is not violent, but gentle. I liked how it put it in the King James Version here, not a striker. Just kind of put a funny image, not someone that's given to striking people. Yeah. If your pastor's walking around striking people, you probably have a problem. I mean, I think that's pretty simple, but normally I don't think most, at least adults, have problems with that. But someone that can keep control of their temper, and that's something that's probably more applicable. Now, this doesn't mean if someone loses their temper, oh, get rid of you, no. That can happen, but not someone that's given to that. And I think we all know what that means. There's some people that they just get hot under the collar really quickly and really easily. And that's, any Christian should be trying to not do that, to get rid of that, but especially a leader. And that's not something that's helpful, particularly with somebody that's going to require a lot of patience and people are going to come talk to them and stuff. You don't. Now that you could also take that, not a striker, so I like that, but someone that does get angry for the right reasons. Now that handles it in the right way. There is good reason to be angry, but there's no good reason to handle it wrongly. Even Jesus was angry. We see that. And for most of us, how he handled it would have been wrong. It wasn't for him. But to handle even righteous anger in a righteous way, to keep your temper under control, to handle it in a way that is helpful to others and not just violent and causing problems. I think that's very important. Keep going. It says, not a lover of money. Why is this thing so dangerous, especially in a church leader? Being a lover of money, so dangerous, especially in someone that's leading a church.
Because it can lead to deception.
Mm-hmm. Being a lover of money is not a good thing for anyone. This love of money is the root of all evil. It's for any Christian, but particularly a leader. And the reason is, I think, that you can, the leader of a church is, there's money involved in a church. Any church has money, it's a necessity. But someone can change what they're saying to get more. To quote Pilgrim's Progress, which I often do, but a man can set aside his morals for a chance at greater gain. And that's particularly dangerous for a leader. If someone knows, oh, this person's got a lot of money, if I just say things a little bit differently, I can get them to come to my church, or I can get them to give more or something. And that's extremely dangerous. It's dangerous for any of us, but a leader in particular, it's just a really bad and really dangerous thing. And the thing is, who of us haven't seen that sells? It works. You have a pastor that he tells people what they want to hear. He can get very wealthy very quickly, and I think it's a dangerous thing. Verse 4 and 5, he must manage his own family well and see that his children obey him with proper respect. Verse 5, if anyone does not know how to manage his own family, how can he take care of God's church? What does this look like in manage his own family well? I don't think this necessarily applies to, you could say, children outside the home or something like that, because, you know, at that point they're making their own decisions and stuff. But that someone that has control of his family, I think for two purposes. One, you see the ability of someone to teach, to handle the church. Like I said, if someone can't manage his own family, how can he take care of God's church? But two, someone whose family is having troubles isn't going to have the time and ability necessary to put towards working in the church. You know, he has other priorities here. You know, even for the best of reasons, he needs to, your family is a priority, and he needs to go work with that. You're not going to have that extra time and, you know, effort to put into that.
The beginning of Samuel is a good example of that. Samuel was chosen when was Eli? I think?
Eli, yes.
His children were taking advantage of the position.
Mm-hmm.
It is taken from him because he wasn't able to control.
Right. Yeah, it talks about there, and I probably should have looked that up, but Eli's children were wicked, even though Eli, to all appearances, it seems like Eli was doing a good job with everything else, but his children were not following God. We know that with King David, and David's children. I mean, who's a better example of a godly man than David? And yet his children were falling apart through pretty much all of his life. We see, he just had problems with that, and that's a very important indicator. It shows how someone not only knows biblical principles, but can apply them in his daily life. Because, you know, that's what's important. You can know a lot, but can you apply it? And that's also a thing that's important in a church, is applying those principles, not just knowing. And, you know, that's once again, I think you could also get too aggressive and, you know, jump on someone because their kid misbehaves or something like that. You know, that's to be expected. Children are children, and they can have their problems, but someone that is going for the right goal, their family's not a disaster, you know, and work with that. And verse 6, he must not be a recent convert, or he may become conceited and fall into the same judgment as the devil. I think this is really important, but also is subject to circumstance. A recent convert, depending on where you are, can mean different things. You know, in the time we're talking to Timothy, probably most of the people would be considered recent converts to what we're thinking of now. However, now, you know, if, you know, in Acts, if someone had been a Christian for 2 years, they likely been a Christian longer than most around them. However, now, this is kind of not the case. You know, you're not going to want to have a pastor that's only been saved for a year and a half or something under most situations. And for the reason of it says, someone can become proud. It's easier to deceive someone that just doesn't have the experience in there. It says falling into the same, same judgment as the devil. Just a warning about rising too fast, I guess. It can go to somebody's head. Nothing else. But I think that's also important. You know, you can see. I was looking for an example in the Bible, and I couldn't find one that worked real well with this. But it is definitely a true thing. Someone that it would be easy to become proud if all of a sudden you're, you know, saved, you study, and you become a pastor or a leader really quickly. And I think that's something to take into consideration. Verse 7, he must have a good reputation with outsiders so that he will not fall into disgrace and into the devil's trap. Why is this important?
Because the devil can get into your mind and convince you that you are right, and you are doing right, and you're not.
That's true. I was thinking, too, say you have a leader in a church, pastor, preacher, however, and they do a great job, but they're also a businessman, and they're known for being either dishonest or just not a good person to work with. That really just puts a kind of a stain on the whole church in a way. It's like, oh, yeah, well, they do that, but how they do business, that's not, nobody wants to work with them or something, or they never pay on time, or that, and why I think what's so just discrediting for a church and such a big deal is, how is anyone in a church supposed to be a very good witness of anything if even the leadership is in that way? Or anyone in a church, not just the leadership. I mean, if we're Christians, we should be trying to have not just a good reputation for spiritual things, but also for anything we do, really anything we do. But I think particularly in work and that, but in all of our dealings, we need to be honest and fair. Because that can really discredit the message of the gospel, of Jesus, of everything. I did want to look at this from a different angle, too. Can somebody read 1 Peter 4, 5, or 15 through 16? And then after that, Luke 6, 22.
Let none of you suffer as a murderer or a thief or an evildoer or as a meddler. Yet, if anyone suffers as a Christian, let him not be ashamed, but let him glorify God in that name.
Okay, so just talking about there, don't suffer for doing something wrong. Try and avoid that. And then Luke 6, 22.
Blessed are you when men hate you, when they exclude you, when they revile you and cast out your name as evil for the Son of Man.
Okay. So there is a portion of our reputation that, in a way, we're going to have a bad reputation. But let it be for the right reasons. If we have a bad reputation as someone that's, oh, they're a Christian, they're weird, they're doing that, that's right. But we're not to have a bad reputation for things, for bad actions, for wrong things, for things that aren't that way. People are going to talk bad about us. They're going to slander, they're going to do that. But it shouldn't, it shouldn't be about us. It should be about Jesus, or about the message we're giving, not about our personal or our business or however lives. It shouldn't be saying should be, oh, well, they're weird, they follow all that, but they're good to do business with. Okay, so verse 8, it says, likewise, like deacons likewise are to be men worthy of respect, sincere, not indulging in much wine, not pursuing dishonest gain, but must keep hold of the deep truths of the faith and with a clear conscience. Paul's making a distinction here between two offices in the church. Some churches, I do believe, have people that are classed as bishops or as deacons. I'm not super familiar with the differences between those two words. I guess you'd take it as maybe a pastor versus an elder or a different thing. The point being, they have almost exactly the same qualifications, so that's kind of why I was just going with church leaders. I guess maybe the differences we see under the deacons is there's not I don't think it's listed in the apt to teach part. Maybe it's someone that's not involved so much in teaching every Sunday, but maybe someone like an elder that's more to do other work in the church, to check up on the pastor, there's lots of other things to do in a church too, other than preaching. I don't know, I could be wrong with that, and,
Remember in Acts, I think it's 3 or 4 or something, where they appointed like 7 men.
yeah, that's true, and I think it speaks to them as deacons.
They had the apostles already and appointed them. I think it's similar to that, they appointed them to take care of some of the other needs, the congregation and the spending needs rather than the main thing, but there was other
Right.
things that they probably took care of. Stephen was one of them, and had 6 other others that were.
Right. And yeah, and that's true, someone that maybe doesn't need the exact same qualifications as far as their job description in the church, but still needs to meet the same standards of, living and how they work in the church. Verse 10 here says, they must be first tested, and then if there's nothing against them, let them serve as deacons. I guess to just, as a point, don't take what someone says or what someone says about them. You need to actually see, test whatever that looks like. It's not given how exactly we're supposed to test them here, but I think it's, put them to a test of some sort. I think at this point it'd be determined by the other leaders of the church, but it's important that it's not just taken at face value. Verse 11, in the same way, their wives are to women worthy of respect, not malicious talkers, but temperate and trustworthy in everything. I think this kind of gets back into, how their family is. What would be the problem if a leader's wife wasn't these things? You have can be all kinds of issues with that. The wife has a lot of influence over her husband. If she's someone that's a malicious, what does it say here? A malicious talker, not temperate, not trustworthy, that's going to rub off in some ways. It's also, if someone's wife isn't that, I don't understand how you can have a family that's going to meet the qualifications for the stuff in there. It causes problems with things like hospitality, a lot of the other things, if you're not agreed on that. Having a good reputation in the world, you can give a bad name to her husband. It's important that it's really all the same as in, handling his family well, but it's important that the family and the leader sets a good example. Can somebody read Ephesians 5:22 through 26? Okay, so kind of just a little bit of a separate thing, but a husband and wife is an example of Christ in the church, and a rough example in some ways, but particularly the leaders, but all Christians, it should be something you think about. That is a example, and it shouldn't be a bad example. Verse 12 is about deacon, husband, one wife managing his children well. We're going to get into that more in the question, so I kind of skipped down to verse 14, where Paul starts a little bit of a different line. It says, Although I hope to come to you soon, I am writing to you these instructions so that if I am delayed, you will know how people ought to conduct themselves in God's household, which is the church of the living God, the pillar and foundation of truth. And ask why Paul was writing this to Timothy. You know, we're certainly glad Paul wasn't right there and that he did have to write it, because now we get to read it. And he's writing to Timothy so that he would know what to do with these things. You know, here is the qualifications. Here's how you do this. From all appearances, Timothy was in the position of starting or setting up a church, choosing leadership, working through that. And that's, you know, and so on. Paul gives us one of the most useful and applicable things for finding qualified leadership in a church, and just a good list of things for us as Christians to adhere to. You know, just for ourselves, it can show us how to better serve God in the church, to better see where we need to work on, what we need to do. Verse 16, as we see a lot with Paul, he gets kind of to the end of a chapter, the end of an area, and he just proclaims and glorifies Jesus. You know, this is what we believe, and this is why we believe it. As he appeared in the body, was vindicated by the Spirit, was seen by angels, was preached among the nations, was believed on in the world, and was taken up into glory. And just Paul kind of giving glory to God for what he's done, for what Jesus has done for us. I'm going to get into the questions here. And some of these were a little bit repetitive of what we already went over, just because of the nature of a list. But question 1, which of the qualifications for church leaders found in this chapter could apply to all believers? Why is this important for all believers to meet high spiritual standards? I would say nearly all of these would apply to all believers, maybe with the exception of apt to teach and obviously a recent convert. If you're a recent convert, you are a recent convert, and there's not much you can do about that except wait. So, but that's not something to worry about. Can somebody read Titus 2, 7 through 8?
An example of good works with integrity and dignity in your teaching. Your message is the sound beyond reproach, so that any opponent will be ashamed, because he doesn't have anything bad to say.
Thank you. I think most of these qualifications should be looked for in ourselves. Like I said, there may be one or two exceptions, but they're more important for church leaders who need to be held to higher standards. But really, all believers should be going after these, wanting to see them in their own lives. And yeah, I don't know if anyone else has anything to say with that. But. Question 2, what are some things you can do to encourage your church leaders, and what are some things you can do to make their work easier? Can someone read Hebrews 13:17? Maybe. Okay, thank you. I guess the biggest thing is just, like it said, obey them, submit to them, and try not to cause problems. There's a lot of people can just cause problems, and for no really good reason. Sometimes there are problems, and sometimes there are things that need to be dealt with and conflicts, but we don't need to just be out looking for that, Edit it down, pray for them. That's always a good thing. It says in this list, people that aren't easily upset or lose their temper, but don't do things that make it easy for people to lose their temper. Everyone, including any pastor, has certain things that bother them more than others and bother them more than most people. We should be aware of those things. Look for them, not to do them, but to figure out what not to do. If something particularly bothers somebody, try not to do it. It's really simple with that. Things, stirring up controversy, different things, just good practice in any way to avoid that, but particularly to make it easier on leaders. Question 3, why is having a good report among unbelievers especially critical for a church leader? And we kind of talked about that quite a bit, but good testimony is important. It's kind of hard to be, or impossible to be a good witness when you're taking advantage of people or being dishonest with them. Can someone read Acts 5:12-14? Okay, I like that verse. It just said, you couldn't hear it. It says, they met together in Solomon's porch. They were esteemed highly, and yet nobody would join them. None of the other people joined them. I think that's a good example for, church. People may not want to join, they may not, but they should esteem you highly, I guess, in a way. I don't know. That seemed to be a good example I saw. Question 4, what are some similarities between the management of a home and the management of a church? How is the church like a family? Once again, we went through that quite a bit, but the church is the family of God. Both need a constant care and love. Both learn by example, probably a lot better than by just straight teaching. Both can, in a way, drive you crazy and need to be handled gently, and so that's, I think, very similar. And I put down last, God is our Father, and we're His children, and it's a similarity how a church is like a family. Question 5, I wasn't really sure what to do with it. It kind of seemed completely different from everything else. But it says, read all the references to truth in 1 Timothy. What does salvation bring, and what is this lacking among those of corrupt minds? This kind of goes outside of where we read today, fairly drastically. But can someone read 1 Timothy 2, verse 4, and someone else 1 Timothy 6, 5? We're almost out of time here, but.
Who wants everyone to be saved and come to the knowledge of the truth? And verse 5?
6, 5. Does anyone have 1 Timothy 6, 5? I can look that up. Okay. So, I'm not gonna read all the references they have written down here just because we don't have time, but, Jesus is the truth. Salvation brings the truth. I think the truth is what's lacking among those with corrupt minds, is here's the question. As, I think as applied to someone that's leading the church, the truth is important, obviously, because kind of the whole message of the church is the truth. Like I said, I was a little confused by why they included that question in here, because it seems to reference most verses from outside this chapter. But I think the truth is, you could put it as a point of this, qualifications and stuff for these people, is just that they're true. So they would say they're true people, people that honor the truth, want to live for the truth of Jesus.
And yeah, I think I see that as being very relevant to everything in that chapter, the real.
Right, yeah,
You're not looking for a show,
right.
you're looking for a real person. And truth comes when you see who the person really is, not who they pretend to be.
Right.
And I think that there's really good with the life thing too, because a true life would be a supporter of character.
Mm-hmm.
And be there for him, help him and give him whatever he needs there to be the leader and to be the head of the household.
Yeah. Well, we're about out of time here, but Don, would you close in prayer for us? Thank you.